when we think back to those special years in yeshiva, and we have very warm memories. Warm memories. Remember the days where we used to sit and plug day after day, seder after seder. And we had notebooks on top of notebooks. And on every seder, Be'iyun we had a notebook, B'kiyut we had a notebook, Night Seder, Chazara, we had a notebook for Michyrnobel in the morning and Musar in the afternoon. And day after day, it's amazing the hours that Borei Olam gave us the ability, the sitzfleisch, to be able to sit for those hours. My son now just started the Mir Yeshiva Bet Midrash. He tells me, Abba, he says, last night I was in high school. He says, for me to sit just from 9:30 to 1 with a recess in between was a whole to-do, a difficulty. He says, now it's amazing. I went to Bet Midrash. He says, I don't know. Hashem gave us a siyata d'shmaya. It's a mindset. It's a switch that you go into Bet Midrash. He says, first Seder, 9:30 to 1. Second Seder, 3:30 to 7:40. The Mir Yeshiva has one of the longest second Seder. 3:30 to 7:40. And he says, we sit and we learn and we're not looking at the time and the time moves. And he said, I could feel a certain siyata d'shmaya that when I entered the Bet Midrash, I entered a new world, a mindset. And this can carry you for years. And what about those special Leil Shishis? What about those mishmernachs, those nights that we spent on a Thursday night, where we sat up and we learned sometimes all night long? I remember the years in Itri in Yerushalayim, when I was there as a bachur, those Thursday nights, they were a treasure. I think back to the warmest memories. Staying up all Thursday night with all the guys in Bet Midrash, sitting and breaking our heads on a Baruch Ber, on a Reb Chaim, on a Rashba, learning over the sugya again and again, writing notes, writing chidushim. And then the guy runs into the Bet Midrash, and you don't realize that it's 4:30 in the morning, and he screams, guys, I have 2 taxis waiting outside to go to the kotel. Who wants to come vatikin? It's unbelievable. You grab your koracha, you grab your tefillin, you run outside, you jump into the taxi. Nobody knows who's paying. You get to the kotel. I thought you had money. No, I thought you had money. No, I thought you had money. Nobody brought money. Oh, man. And the guy starts yelling his head off. Atem Amerikai. And you stand there by the kotel. And you walk around for a minute. You can't believe you're there. And it's Lifnot Boker. And the birds. Wow, the birds. The birds by the kotel. They're the sugi in itself. And everybody sits and starts praying in a different minyan. And one minyan is holding here and the other one's holding there. And then finally, somehow or other, we don't still understand how it works out at the end, where they all somehow or other meet up at that minute of nets, of sunrise. And at that moment, what was hustle and bustle of literally 1,000 people broken out into who knows how many minyanim. And you hear the rash. And then at the same split second, it all goes. Hush. And the silence is deafening. It's powerful. And there's a certain ema. There's a certain majesty. A certain awesomeness that you feel in the silence of that moment. Even the birds who are going around in circles over your head by the kotel. For that moment of nets, it's like they stop. You look up and you say, wow, I'm standing under Sha'ar HaShamayim. I could literally feel Abba's presence. Shh. We remember those years. And then you come back that morning and you go to Mea Sharim, or you go through the streets and you end up by Angel's Bakery, and you pick up a kokosh cake for Shabbos straight out of the oven. It's still hot. The plastic is hot. It's literally hot. The chocolate is oozing off the side of the bag. You're sitting there on the city bus or on the taxi and you're licking it out, telling yourself, no, keep it for Shabbos. No, don't do it. Don't do it. Keep it. Those were years, guys. Then you hit the sack and you go to sleep. And you wake up an hour before Shabbat. You run down to the mikveh. And you come back and you realize that you don't have a shirt for Shabbat. I remember doing some of my shirts in the sink. Wow. That's a memory. And then Shabbat begins and we come into yeshiva and we sing Friday night. There's nothing like a yeshiva Friday night. The guys are singing their hearts out. And then you come to the big meal and we eat and you find out which Rosh Yeshiva is this week's Shabbat Rosh Yeshiva, right? They used to switch off. Every week a different Rosh Yeshiva would come to spend Shabbat with the Bachrim. You want to know, whose Shabbat is this week? You remember that Gemara in Berachot, the Gemara of Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. The Gemara says that after they made the Pshara and they both became Rosh HaYeshiva, 3 weeks and 1 week and so on, people used to ask, whose week is this week? We used to come in and ask, whose week is this week? Which Rosh Yeshiva is here this week? Which Rebbe spending us the Shabbat this week? It's beautiful to see your Rebbe that you're so used to during the week in Shabbat clothing. You're not used to seeing him like that. And the Rebbe that during the week might be wearing a down hat, he comes in with a streimel on Shabbat. Some of our Rebbes in Itri were Yerushalmis. Some were, Reb Simcha Schiff was from the Gera dynasty. He used to come in with a Gera, I'm telling you, Malchus, it was Malchut. And then after the Seder Friday night, everybody figures out another way how to break into the kitchen. And then there's a little taster's test on Friday night cholent in the yeshiva kitchen. That every week they attempt to lock up and try to figure out, how did they break in this week? There's always one chacham that figured out how to get into the kitchen, and he comes out with plates and plates of cholent, and the guys are sitting there at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they're singing with a kumzitz. These were years, guys. These were years, such years. Unbelievable. Vayivgat bamakom, vayalen sham, ki ba hashemesh. Vayikach me'avnei hamakom, vayaseh merashotav, vayishkav bamakom hahu. Yaakov Avinu made it to the place. The sun was going down. He takes from the avanim of the place. He lays down, puts his head on the rock, and he sleeps b'makom hahu. Now generally, the spot that you sleep is the place that you are. It's very hard to sleep in a spot that you aren't. And therefore, vayishkav b'makom hahu ma betach. No, I mean, how else is it? Says Rashi, no, you're missing something here. This is a lashon miuta. This is coming to tell you something fantastic. Vayishkav b'makom hahu. In that spot, on that night, he slept. To tell you that the prior 14 years, he has never slept. Not day, not night. He's been in the yeshiva for 14 years, learning Yomam Valayla. Wow, what a Rashi. Jack, you remember that? He went to the yeshiva of Shem Va'ever. Unbelievable. Says the Chidah, you see it in the Pasuk. He says, the Rashi Tevot of Vayelech Haranas, Vav Chet, 14. Those are the 14 years that he sat in Shem Va'ever. They bring all different types of remazim to demonstrate to you that that was the place that Yaakov Avinu hid for 14 years. learning Torah day and night. And this was the first night in 14 years that he actually went to sleep for the first time. That night. Unbelievable. Why doesn't the Torah tell us? Why don't you tell us straight? Why don't you tell us that Yaakov Avinu, he leaves the house of his parents. They send him away quickly because they didn't want Esav to kill him. He's on his way to Haran. Tell us. Vayifka b'makom. He stopped in a place called Yeshivat Shem Va'ever. And he stayed there for 14 years. And he learned Torah Yomam V'Layla. And then when he was done for those 14 years learning Torah, he left the yeshiva, went on his way to the place that he wanted to finally get to get his wives. A place called Haran, where Lavan lived. And the story goes on. Isn't that something that would be a great chizuk for us to know? That Yaakov Avinu, on his way out to Haran, stopped off in yeshiva and learned for 14 years? The Torah doesn't say one word. Do you know how me and you know that Yaakov Avinu actually learned Torah for 14 years and didn't even sleep one night? It was a diuk from a Rashi on 2 words in the Torah. Because the pasuk says, "Vayishka b'makom hahu," and I need you to understand that that's the first night he slept. Mashma, before that, he didn't sleep. Oh, those are the 14 years in Sheva Ever. Why can't you just tell it to me openly? Why does it have to be hidden? Why do you have to hide something like that? Wouldn't that give us such a chizuk? To know that our Zayda, Yaakov Avinu, the Amud HaTorah, is Amud HaTorah. Yaakov Avinu's Torah. He sat and learned Yomam V'Layla. Lo Yom V'Lo Layla. He never stopped. He didn't even sleep. Shouldn't you tell me that? And once you're telling me that he did sleep that night, and he didn't learn for the first time in 14 years, why Taka didn't he learn that night? Why did he Taka go to sleep? Why didn't he learn that night? For someone who's learning Yomam V'Layla for 14 years, and suddenly they decide to put a head on a pillow, that's a chidush. I got to find out why. Why did he decide to go to sleep that night? Why didn't he learn? Why didn't he learn? So the truth of the matter is that these questions are asked by the Khatam Sofer. The Khatam Sofer, in this week's parasha, he wants to understand, why didn't the Torah tell us about the 14 years openly? Why does Yaakov Avinu go to sleep that night? Why Taka didn't he learn? The Khatam Sofer works with all these questions. And then there's one more question that I'd like to bring to the cuff, and then maybe we can try to piece this together for a moment. This is a question that in the Sefer Magid HaRakia, Rabbi Gladstein brings in the name of the Paneach Raza. But this is a famous question. And everybody remembers that after he went to sleep that night, the Pasuk tells us, Vayikatz Yaakov Mishinato. Yaakov wakes up from his sleep. And then the Pasuk says, Vayomer, Achen yesh Hashem b'makom hazeh, va'anochi lo yadati. I had no idea. Vayashkem Yaakov b'boker, vayikach et ha'even asher sam merashotav, vayasem otam matzeva. He turns that even into a matzeva. Vayitzok shemen al rosha. And he now pours oil on the top of this even, this matzeva. And sure enough, he's going to name the place Bet El. He's going to say, wow, I didn't know that this was Har HaMoriah. This was the Makom HaMikdash. I had no idea. This is Shara Shamayim. And he anoints and he pours oil over the Even. Where did he get the oil? We know that when Yaakov Avinu comes to Rachel Imenu, it says that he cried. Rashi tells us that the reason why he cried when he saw her is because he showed up with nothing. We all know that Eliphaz, who chases Yaakov to kill him, Eliphaz, the son of Esav, chases down Yaakov and he comes to kill him. Eliphaz grew up on the lap of Yitzchak Avinu. He knew that to kill Yaakov is not a good thing. And because of that, he had a nidon. To the extent that he asks his uncle, he says, Yaakov, you paskin for me. I have kibud av ha'em, my father told me to kill you. But then I also have the kavod of my grandfather Yitzchak, who would not want me to kill you. My grandmother Rivka would not want me to kill you. So who do I listen to? That's what he asks Yaakov Avinu. Yaakov Avinu says, I have a lamdisha pshara for you. I have a brilliant answer. A way to be mekayim your father's words without killing me. He says, yeah, how's that? He says, Ani Chashuv kemet. Take everything I have. Chashuv kemet. And that's exactly what took place. He took from Yaakov Avinu even the clothing on his back. He left him, mamash. He took everything. Yaakov Avinu, the famous Midrash, he had to go into the water. Then Hashem made a nest that there was this caravan coming by with a prince and the horse, and the water shot out, and he fell in the water and he drowned. And Yaakov Avinu got his clothing. Unbelievable Midrash. But Bekitzur, everything was taken. Ani chashuv kemet. Finished. You killed me. That's it. But there was one thing that Eliphaz did not take. One thing. And that was his stick. How do we know that? Ki b'makli avarti et hayarden hazeh. Unbelievable. All I came across this Yarden with was just my staff. Not even his clothing. He didn't have his clothing. But his staff, he didn't take. Or maybe in a moment we'll find out his staff, Yaakov would not give. I'll take my clothing, it'll be mavayish me, no problem. But my staff stays with me. I need my stick to walk. Later on we find out a sod. Says the Panei Acharaza, you're right. Everything was taken from Yaakov Avinu. And therefore it's a pella. Where did he get the oil from? He's in the middle of nowhere. Where did he get the oil to be? Vayizok Shemen. Shemen al Rosha. Says Panei Acharaza something brilliant. That stick had something special about it. It was hollow on the inside. And it was the old screw-off top cap stick. That inside of it, he had in there oil, he had shemen. And the reason why Yaakov Avinu would go everywhere with that stick was because of the shemen that was inside the screw-off hollowed cap of this unbelievable stick, this makel. And the reason why that oil meant so much to him was because that oil was enabling him every single night to be able to learn Torah. So even if he would be somewhere in the wilderness, somewhere in the desert, somewhere on top of a mountain, but he has still oil. And like this he can make a small fire. And like this he can look, or at least learn, le'or haner, le'or hashemen. And that's why it meant so much to him, that stick. You could take everything you want, just leave me my Torah. You can take my clothing, take my money, take my wealth, you take my cattle, take whatever you want, but this I will not let you take, Eliphaz. The stick stays with me. Because what you don't know is that there's a treasure in that stick. My ability to learn Yomam V'Layla is in that stick. And that I'll fight you for. That I'll fight you for. That I'll fight you for. That you can't have. And therefore says Panei Acharaza, you want to know where he got the shemen? He got the shemen from inside the stick. It was hollow with the screw-off tap on top. He had the oil inside, and he would use the oil to learn night after night. Amazing. 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 Ay, 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 ad kedei kach, Rabotai, if you want to see the wow where we're going with this. I heard from Rabbi Gladstein, he says that Yaakov Avinu, the Sefer Yam HaTalmud, brings in the name of the Shach al Torah, that oil inside the hollow stick of Yaakov that he used to learn Torah with, that was the shemen that later became the shemen of the Pach of Ner Chanukah, the miraculous oil that ceased to go out and instead burnt for 8 days and 8 nights. That was the oil of Yaakov Avinu. And if you want to know why Yaakov Avinu went back for the Pachim Ktanim, what happens? Yaakov Avinu goes back for the small jars. Small jars, you're going back, leaving your family over Yarden for something so insignificant. And at that time, he was already coming from Lavan, and he was wealthy, and he already had a tremendous amount of cattle, and he had tremendous... What are you crying about? Little jars? Pachim Ktanim? No, those weren't little jars. Those were the Pachim Ktanim of the Shemen. That was the Pach Shemen. Later on, that Pach Shemen, which was from the oil of the stick, that he used for 14 years to be able to learn Torah, Yomam Valayla. That Pach Shemen he went back for, because that oil is the oil of my Torah. And one day those Pach Shemen is going to find its way to Klal Yisrael at the moment that we need it the most. At the moment that they're searching for something pure, and they're going to find my Torah. Because en ora ela Torah. There is no light without Torah. There's no creation of light without a Torah learning. You want to create light? You got to schwitz over a daf Gemara. That's the way you create light. In the oil was the sweat and tears of 14 years of Yaakov Avinu's haravanya, of his sitting and learning, Yomam Valayla, and he wouldn't stop. The Dma'ot and the learning was in that oil. That's the oil that you can have a miracle of a Chanukah of 8 days and 8 nights. It's unbelievable. This is the Shach on Torah, Rabotai. I'm not telling you some, this is the Shach. The Shach al HaTorah writes that the reason why he went back for the Pachim Ktanim and the oil that he had in the Makel was the oil that later on made its way through the history to Klal Yisrael's needed moment of Chanukah, when we were looking for Pach Shemen and we couldn't find nothing, and we found the oil of Yaakov Avinu's Torah. That was the miraculous oil that the Nes of Chanukah came from. Talking about how Chanukah is the holiday of the Lomdei Torah, now you have a new pshat. Because without the original Ben Torah, without the original yeshiva boy, original yeshiva bachur, you wouldn't have a Chanukah. You think miracles just happen? Somebody had to sweat for 14 years for that miracle to come about. People only see later on. You know, it's very interesting. We find this in life a lot. People sometimes are zochet to unbelievable miracles. If they would know what went into the behind the scenes for that miracle to come about, how many people had to cry over Tehillim for generations, how many grandfathers and grandmothers are in Shamayim crying over a guy for things to happen in his life at the moment that he needs it the most. For Borei Olam to send a miracle. What do you think, that miracle's bechinam? That miracle costs. We paid for the miracle of Chanukah Pach Shemen, a grandfather who had to sit 14 years, day and night, and learn the Haravanya. It was paid for. Don't think this came bechinam. Don't think it came out of nowhere. You don't know what was in the making for so many years just to have that miracle today. If you would only know the behind the scenes, you thought, wow, look at that. Nes! Do you know what it took to bring that about? It's really amazing. So why didn't he learn that night then? Why didn't he learn that night? Says a Khatam Sofer, because this night of the opening pasuk of the parasha, and he has many proofs to this, was Leil Shabbat, Friday night. And there's a Gzeir de Rabbanan that if you're alone, you cannot learn Le'or Haner, Shema Yate. You might tip the oil. You hear the Khatam Sofer? Isn't that brilliant? And that's why Yaakov Avinu woke up and he said, Vayira vayomar, ma nora hamakom hazeh? Ein ze ki bet Elokim v'zeh asher shamayim, v'anochi lo yadati. I had no idea. If I would have known this was the Makom Mikdash, the halacha is en shvut b'mikdash. There's no Rabbanans on Har HaMoriah. So that I could have used the oil. So I could have learnt last night. I didn't have to go to sleep. V'anochi lo yadati. Ay, ay, ay. You hear Khatam Sofer? You hear this Khatam Sofer? If I would have known this is Har HaBayit, I would not have gone to sleep. The only reason why I slept is because tonight is the first time in 14 years I can't use the oil. Back in yeshiva when I was with other people and there was a shomer that was omed al gabav that's there to make sure that you don't come to Shema Yateh. There's a heter to be able to learn al gabe or haner. But this is the first time I'm alone in 14 years. He left the yeshiva. He's alone on Har HaBayit. He says, if I would have known this is Har HaBayit, and I would have known that there's no Rabbanans over here, because En Shvut B'Mikdash, I would have been able before Shabbat to light up the oil and been able to learn all Friday night like I did for the last 14 years. Because over here there's no Shvut, there's no Rabbanan, there is no Shema Yateh. If I would have only known, that's the reason why I didn't learn all night. Khatam Sofer. Torah, Torah, Jack, Torah. There's nothing else. Don't kid yourself. There's nothing else. You want to hear something? The Torah of Yaakov Avinu brought us the Nes of Chanukah. You're leaving the Torah? Do you know what our Torah, how it's magne umatzle, how it saves us, how it protects us, how many nisim we come on to because of our Torah and the Torah of our fathers and our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers that still stand for us adayom. Because they were moser nefesh to learn, because they stayed up days as nights and nights as days with their little pachshemen, with their little makel, with their little trick, with their little stick, with their little oil, and they wouldn't be mevater on 1 minute of learning. And they paid in advance for miracles for their children and grandchildren for generations to come. And to us, we walk in, if we would only know what that learning is. We spoke this past Monday night about the mitzvah of Kibud Av and Esav, the Orah Makif, and we said Kal v'chomer, ben beno shel Kal v'chomer. When you're dealing with not just a regular mitzvah, you're dealing with Talmud Torah, which is Keneged Kulam. Do you understand what type of or we're talking about? How lucky we are to be able to learn. How lucky we are. And in our generation today, you have an iPod the size of a pack of gum, and on it has the entire Shas with the greatest Rebbes waiting for you to just press their button. And they'll deliver you the daf on a silver platter. And we can't find time. How many miracles are waiting to be born from a little shvitz of a little mesirut nefesh of Torah? Ay, ay, ay. That shemen is the shemen of Nes Chanukah. The shemen of Yaakov's Torah, says the Shach. The shemen of Chanukah. This is fantastic. My Rebbe told me this amazing story, this amazing maaseh. And I'm asking Borei Olam to give me a hand to say it over proper. Because the way he told it to me over the phone today was mesmerizing. 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 Tomorrow night is the yard site of Rabbi Aharon Michyrnobel. Zechet Tzadik Lebracha was a great tzaddik. His father, Reb Mordechai Michyrnobel, was the son of the Maor Einayim. Reb Mordechai Michyrnobel, he had a very secret and special job. He was in charge of feeding and taking care and supporting of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim of his generation. He knew who they are, he knew where they are, and he would travel from country to country, finding them, supporting them, feeding them, keeping an eye on them. Reb Mordechai Michyrnobel, his son, Rabbi Aharon, his son, his oldest, who at the time already just got married and was still living by his father with his new kala. And his father, Reb Mordechai Michyrnobel, Ramatal, I think they called Michyrnobel, would go out and sometimes take trips for months because he was taking care of the Lamed Vav Tzadikim. And he wouldn't show up for months. And the father would be away, and the family would have to fend on their own for themselves. There were times where he would come back to his wife crying and says, Ramatal, we didn't have a lot to eat, we had difficulty, the family. One time, he goes away for a few months. He comes back home, his wife is crying. It was difficult for us, without you here, it was very hard. The family we needed. So Ramatal said, Aharon. He turns to his son, Rabbi Aharon. He says, Aharon, couldn't you do something while I was away, just to put a few dollars together, a few whatever, kopek, I don't know what it was, together in order to help your mother to feed the family? You see she's crying? Rabbi Aharon said, Tata, Abba, what could have I done? I sat and learned Torah, Yom V'Layla. What could have I done to bring money in? I'm not a socher, I'm not a barhachi. What would you have wanted me to do? So Mordechai turns to Rabbi Aharon and he says to him, what I want you to do, I would want you to go to a nearby town, come with a few chassidim, Friday night, make a minyan, make a gewaldige tish, give a chabura, give a drasha, give chizuk, and then Motzei Shabbat, people will come to you with their kvittel, and then they would give you a few dollars, a pidyon, and you'd give him berachot, and you take the pidyonot, and you'd be able to feed your mother. Why did you do that? Rabbi Aharon says, Tata, I don't know, I'm not a Rebbe, I'm not an Admor. He just got married, he was a young Avrech. Rabbi Aharon Michyrnobel, he was a young Avrech. He was probably Shana Rishona. He says, Abba, I'm not a Rebbe. I'm not an Admor. Mordechai says, what are you talking about? Of course you're a Rebbe. He says, go right now to a town, take a few chassidim with you, find your place, take it for a Shabbat. Friday night, you're going to give a tish, you're going to give shrayim, you're going to give chizuk, and Motzei Shabbat, you're going to take the kvitlach from people, you're going to take a pidyon, and you'll bring back money, and you'll help your mother further. Go now. He says, Abba, Tata, which town should I go to? He says, which town? Mordechai thinks for a minute. I'm going to send you to the town of Shkolov. He said, Shkolov. Shkolov was the town where they had the most mitnagdim. All the misnagdim were there. It was a town where they weren't into Hasidut. Let's just leave it at that. He says, but that's what you're sending me? It's like the lamb to the slaughter. What? That's where, from all towns that you could have picked in Europe, that's the one stronghold of the misnagdim. There is where you're sending me to set up shop, to give a tish Friday night. He says, you know what they're going to do to me there? Abba, which town should I go to? Mehmet. He says, go to Shkolov. He says, okay. If this is what the Tata says, Rabbi Aharon Michyrnobel takes a few chassidim, and they travel, and they come in Friday afternoon to Shkolov. As they come into the town, people see that these rabbis-looking people in the bigdei Hasidut, with long clothes, with beautiful peot, with beautiful beards, dressed differently than the rest of the town. The word quickly gets back to the rabbi of the town, and the rabbi comes walking out and he says, Malicha, what are you doing here in Shkolov? This is not exactly your territory. Rabbi Aharon says, I'm here for a Shabbat. I'm going to give a tish Friday night. I'm going to take pidyon. Motzei Shabbat. And I'm here for the weekend. The Rav looks at him and says, Rabbi, listen to me. I don't know if you know which town you're in. Do me and you a favor. He says, if you're a Talmid Chacham, then not only should you stay, but I beg you to stay. And not only do I beg you to stay, but if you are a Talmid Chacham, you're not just here for Drashot Hevel Havalim, you are a real Talmid Chacham, I will set you up. I will give you your own Bet Midrash. I will give you your own tzibur. I will make sure that Friday night your tish will be maleh. I will make sure that people will come to you for berachot pidyonot. But that's al t'nai that you're a real Talmid Chacham. You're not a sketch. No dirashot shel dofi. You're real. Rabbi Aharon says, a real Talmid Chacham. Ich bin ein junger Mann, a real Talmid Chacham. A real Talmid Chacham? Says the rabbi said, yes. Because if not, don't waste my time. And please do you and me a favor from what's coming at you in this town and leave. That's what he told him. So Rabbi Aharon said, how do I show if I'm a Talmid Chacham or not? So the Rav says, wait, we'll find out right now. He walks into the Bet Midrash, the Rav. He takes a Gemara down from the shank. He brings it to Rabbi Aharon Michyrnobel. And he opens up the Gemara and he points to a Tosafot. He says, tell me pshat in this Tosafot. If you could tell me pshat in this Tosafot, you're a Talmid Chacham. You're the real deal. Rabbi Aharon, he looks down. He starts going quickly through the Tosafot, just very quickly. And he looks at the Rav and he says, Chvod Harav, if you would have shown me a different Tosafot in Shas, I could have attempted to be masbir to you pshat with siyata deshmaya as best as I could. But this Tosafot is not something that al regel ahat I can give you a pshat or be masbir you a derech, a mahalach in this talk. This is a very shvera taisvis. I need to sit Friday night, Shabbat day, and really work. And Bezat Hashem, Sunday morning, I will have for you a magnificent pshat on this Tosafot. The Rav looks at him and says, you're a Talmid Chacham. He says, how do you know? He says, because I worked on this Tosafot for over 2 years. And I cried, and I davened, and I begged for a Yeshua. And ad hayom I'm still waiting for a pshat pshat in this Tosafot. If you would have even attempted to give me a pshat in this Tosafot, kacha al regel achat, I would have thrown you out by your payas. So we told him, you hear this? Because you told me that it's a shvera Tosafot, that is the proof that you know how to learn. To know what shver is already something. He says, you could stay. He gave him a bet midrash. Rabbi Arnold that night gave a tish, Friday night. First time in the history of Shkolov. Motzai Shabbat, Pidyon, Birachot. But Rabbi Aharon kept his word. All Friday night he worked on the Tosafot. All Shabbat he worked on the Tosafot. Motzai Shabbat he was still working on the Tosafot. And he started to daven and cry. He said, Borei Olam, Eibishter, Borei Olam, help me, help me, help me, help me. This Rav, he was nice enough against all the people. He was nice enough to go and help. Please. That night he fell asleep. And he wakes up and there's a man standing in front of him. And the man says, I see you're working on this Tosafot. I want to help you. Let's learn it again. No chaval. Rabbi Aharon looks at the man and says, you want to help me with Tosafot? He looked like a pasha guy. So you want to help me this time? He says, yeah. They start learning it again, and the man starts telling him Mapik Margaliot. He starts telling him literally Pshat from Gan Eden. He taught him the Tosafot beyond the understanding of humans. Rabbi Aharon heard this, he was dancing, he was crying, he was thanking, falling. He turns to the man and he says, Mihu zevezel. And he says to him, I am the Bala Tosafot that wrote this Tosafot. Shamayim sent me to be Megale to you the real pshat in this Tosafot, so that you'll be able to give it over to this Rav who's been crying for years to just know pshat. And then he leaves. Rabbi Aharon couldn't sleep all night. All night he went it again and again and again. It comes morning, he didn't sleep. But the Rav was waiting. There was a deal in place. The Rav was waiting. And Sunday morning, Rabbi Arnold comes to shul, and the Rav says, no! Rabbi Arnold says, I have pshat. He says, what? You have pshat? I have pshat. And he tells him over the pshat from the Baalei Tosafot. The Rav starts crying. He grabs Rabbi Arnold's hands and they start dancing in the Bet Midrash. And they're dancing. It was Hakafot. This was Matan Torah. This was Simchat Torah. And when they finish dancing, he gives Rabbi Arnold a kish, a hug. And he says, I knew min hashamayim when they sent you to Shkolov. It was for me. It wasn't for you. It was for me. It's for my Torah. I cried. I begged. I knew that this was something. The Rav walks out of the shul and he takes the two biggest gevirim in this city, and they go around from house to house collecting for Rabbi Aharon Michyrnobel, the Rebbe in town, in Shkolov. And people are looking at the rabbi. This is from the Misnagdim, this is from the... And they said, yeah, with two gevirim from door to door, collecting Hamon Kesef. They bring it to Rabbi Aharon, he says, here, this is at least what I can give you for what you did for me. It's the least I can do what you did for me. It's unbelievable. Rabbi Aharon comes home. Rabbi Aharon comes home and his father's waiting with a smile. He says, no, what's the Geshen in Shkolov? What happened? What happened in Shkolov? He says, Tata, you know good and well in Shkolov. That's why from all the places in Europe, you sent me there. Mordechai said, yes, you're right, Michyrnobel. He says, there was someone there crying over a Daf Gemara, crying over a Tosafot. And it was creating so much tsar in Shamayim that he was crying over that Tosafot and he didn't have whom to get it from, that I had to send you. I had to send you. He says, you think you went for the Pidyonot? That's what you think you went for. You think you went for the Pidyonot. You think you went for the Tish. You went because someone was begging and crying for Torah, because that Torah of Mesirut Nefesh is the Torah that holds up the world and brings miracles. Thank you for listening.